wants to hear the reality of it. They just want to be and moan about it. All right, great. So I get it with the Romney thing. I was never a giant Romney fan, even before this. I thought he went way out of his way to bash Trump. And I do get the incredible olive branch appearance of this. But, I mean, who knows? He's meeting with other people. He's meeting with Petraeus. He's meeting with other people, too, so who knows? But it sure, at the beginning, looked like it was just a token meeting. All right, we're going to switch gears a little bit. Now, I use Periscope and different things I have on all the time. My kids tease me, Dad, why do you have that on all the time? Well, because while I'm doing my work on my computer at home, I can glance to my left and see all the big news stories, and I can see them live because there's somebody with a camera showing it all the time. So early yesterday morning, in the middle
Welcome inside the Parisi Palace, high above 2919 East Broadway. This is a special edition of the Jake Feinberg Show, coming to you live on Power Talk. Please go to our website, powertalk.live. Download our free app and stream all of our live local shows, including Solomon on Blast, the Jim Parisi Show, and yours truly, the Jake Feinberg Show. We can't thank you enough for your support. So we can continue to enlighten you today, and we take you through the journey through an electric tube with a man who has figured out a way to chromatically expand people's the sonic nature of music. He's been doing it for decades, and it's an honor to finally connect with him. Mike Maineri, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Hey, Jake, how are you?
How you doing, boss?
I did recognize that last piece because I only heard about 15 seconds of it.
Yeah,
I knew immediately it was from that album, which actually was one of the reasons why that company, which was, I think, Solid State.
That's correct.
Dropped me as an artist.
I mean,
when we finished that take, which lasted, I think, about 15 minutes, was a totally free piece. I looked up at the engineer and our producer, and their jaws were dropped to the floor.
And, I want to ask you something, because at this time, I mean, you could go back to a Steely Dan album, or predates a little bit of Steely Dan, but Joni Mitchell or James Taylor, they had conceptual albums. And I'm just curious about this album. I mean, conceptually, I could care less that Manny album or whoever they were in charge of dropped you. I'm just curious about
Sonny Lester.
Sonny Lester, yeah, Sonny Lester. I dig actually, but was this a conceptual?
Couldn't blame him. It was.
Was it a conceptual album, and if so, what was the concept?
You know what it was? It was what I was working on that particular year. I was working with Jeremy Stogg and the Saders occasionally when we were backing Tim Hardin, and of course we had done some gigs as an instrumental group. And I was working with Donald McDonald. The core group was with Joe Beck, Donald McDonald, Warren Bernhardt, and I think Hal Gaylor was playing acoustic bass.
You're right.
I'm pretty sure. So, and we were experimenting with a lot of electronic, not only music, but like we'd tape stuff and then split it up into, 500 pieces and then put it back together, and then you'd have that just loop while we were playing. So And I was also working with the woman who sang, turned out to be my wife
Sally,
a year later.
Sally Waring.
Sally Waring.
Are you still married to her?
Sally and I, no, we did raise 4 children together.
Oh, that's great.
And Sally and I were working on some songs for her album, and so that's why she appeared on the album with a string quartet.
I guess.
And I was studying at the time. I was studying with Don Sebesky, and I think you know that name.
Oh my gosh.
Studying arranging and orchestration with Don Sebesky. So conceptually, it was just like, okay, this is what I'm doing now. I'd like to record it and let's just see what happens. And also, I have been playing with Chuck Rainey on quite a few funk dates, so I thought it'd be interesting to have electric bass, and have him do his thing on bass, and also have an upright bass player.
Are you talking
at the same time?
This is so classic to be talking with you about this. I mean, were you
like 2 bass players? Like it was, kind of early on to be experimenting with.
Well, no, I mean, I listened to albums a couple years later where you had 2 upright bass players. But with Rainey, was it studio gigs or was it like live funk gigs you were playing?
Yeah, we did a couple of live gigs, but we played quite a bit in the studio, and we would just sort of jam. He'd show up some of those White Elephant jam sessions, later on in the years, like the 78, 68, 69, 70. When I don't know if you're familiar with that album, but it was basically a jam band that I would put together at when a studio was dark at night, because I was producing and arranging on quite a few projects. I had access to some of the large studios in New York, and some of the smaller ones, and so I would just call that rhythm section and everybody else I knew. I said, hey, if you're free tonight and you want to come by and jam, fall by. So sometimes we had like 5 guitarists, Spinoza, Hugh McCracken, Sam Brown, Bob Mann, Joe Beck, 2 drummers, it'd be like Steve Gadd and Donald McDonald, 2 or 3 bass players, Tony Levin, Chuck Rainey, and then a horn section, which would be something like Randy Brecker, John Faddis, Lou Soloff, saxophones, George Young, Frank Ficcari, Michael Brecker, Ronnie Cuba. It was just like amazing. Barry Rogers on trombone. So whoever would fall by would just come by, and I'd have these grooves written out with little, horn arrangements and some singers, 4 or 5 singers. And see, actually on that White Elephant album, I know I'm jumping ahead a few years, but I didn't even actually play vibraphone on that album. I think I played organ and piano. Like Warren Bernhardt and I would sort of switch off of in terms of keyboards. I was more or less the arranger and, the gatherer of musicians.
Well, but you don't
fall by and let's just jam. And we would jam for 3, 4, 5 hours.
Well, what you don't know, what you're going to find very funny is actually last week I was scheduled. You were under the weather, but I was interviewing. Did my second interview with Steve Gadd, and at this point, as money a drummer as he is, in our two hours of interview so far, out of the 4 tracks that I've played for him, he is 0 for 4 in guessing the tracks. And the track that I played for him, last week was Peace of Mind off White Elephant, and with the wily Mike Maineri on vocals. And he's like, I played him the track, and he's like, who's singing? I said, it's Mike. It's Maineri. He's like, oh man. He's like, Mike had his own vibe going on, man. Mike had his own, and I had a tattered copy of that White Elephant album, and everybody looks like they're having a ball late night in the studio.
Very good.
But I want to go back for a second.
Go ahead.
All right, this looping thing, because we are in the digital realm. My daughters have become inculcated with electronic beats. People that are ripping samples off your solid state albums and looping them. But can you talk about your experiences? It's kind of a threefold question, but musique concrète, looping, and ultimately the organic, natural sounds of the environment. How did you even get into that, and who were the first cats you used to work on with musique concrète or the looping stuff?
Actually, it was Warren Bernhardt and Donald McDonald and I. And it was really Donald and Warren who began in looping, where they would, just sit and basically, get high.
Yeah, no, I just exactly.
Sit there and we'd play a gig, and they'd record it, and Jeremy sometimes would come, Jeremy Steig, but often not. It would just be Warren and Donald up at his house in the Bronx, and they'd sit there for hours. I mean, like days, and just going through tapes of gigs that we had done, that we had recorded, and I'd fall by, and we'd all participate, and sort of we just cut up these tapes and say, this could work with this could work with that, and most of it was sort of like helter skelter, but it turned out they turned out to be very interesting loops. And while we were playing, Jeremy was, a fantastic artist, and cartoonist.
Oh yeah, well his dad lived on his dad's books too.
So he, while we play, he'd have this sort of a coloring sheet, and as we were playing, he'd be drawing, and slowly
cool.
these beautiful drawings of his would just appear, on a screen, like a silk screen. And they just would move up as we play. And so we were experimenting early on. I mean, it's when I basically used pickups on the bars of my vibraphone so that I could go through wah-wah pedals and various other fuzz tones and loops. This is back in 65, 66.
This is so important for younger. I mean, and also let's be clear, you guys were cutting up analog tape. I mean, you were cutting up you were looping actual tape, not
tape. Yeah. Quarter-inch tape.
Quarter-inch tape. I mean, can I ask you a question?
We'd have two machines. It'd be really, really cool.
I mean,
it's really a cool process.
Were you the first? I mean, I know I did a few interviews with Roger Kellaway, legendary cat, and he did one gig where he had some electronic music that he looped, and he had a gig with Mel Lewis and Richard Davis at a library, and they had so they were listening to the electronic music through headphones and then playing another arrangement. Did you actually go out and do this kind of multi-dimensional artistic engagements? Like what I'm saying is silk screens, colors, paintings, and playing music as well?
Sure. Yeah, we did. Yeah, we played at the Cafe Go-Go. We did, actually we did quite a few gigs, some of them up in Woodstock later on, in the later 60s. Bernhard and I were doing some performances. We actually did one in Provincetown, Rhode Island.
Wow. Wow. Can you talk about a seminal one? Like, were there cats coming up to you from the rock scene? I mean, because there were no genres back then. Do you remember anybody coming up and saying, "Boy, that's pretty hip, Mike"?
Well, yes, I remember guys coming like Richie Havens. When we were playing at the Go-Go. As a matter of fact, Richie was. I'll digress for a minute. Richie was really responsible for me. Putting pickups on my vibraphone, because when we had played a set, I was playing totally acoustic when I first started playing with Jeremy, and everybody was. I think Zappa had sat in because Zappa was playing upstairs with the Mother's Invention, and everybody was amplified except me. And I walked over to Richie Havens, who was sitting in the back, and I said, "How did it sound?" He said, "I couldn't hear a note you played." He says, "Why don't you?" I said, "Oh, great.
That's great. That's just the best thing you could possibly
Why don't you put?" And so he had one of these little Barkus Berry type pickups, the little hot dot pickups on his acoustic guitar, and he would put that use that with a preamp and put it through an amplifier and through the house system. He said, "Why don't you put one of those on on each one of your bars, which I did. And, I mean, he was really responsible for me to sort of like it was the idea really came from his head to my actually doing it, and so then
Can I
it
shoot
allowed me to
I
trigger all kinds of things.
Before you go on, was it the mothers that were drowning out your quartet, or what?
It was actually Frank that sat in, but the mothers were playing upstairs, and then actually Frank and I and Joe Beck, the guitarist.
Oh my
we
God!
used to,
No, I need, you are. This is like I could spend 9 hours talking about Joe Beck. Go ahead, please. Yeah.
Yeah, he was just he was a genius.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were. All three of us were just basically experimenting with orchestration, and then on Saturdays we would hire like a string quartet or a small woodwind section, like an oboe, bassoon, 2 violins, whatever, different sections, and write music. Just as kind of a rehearsal, just to hear what was in our heads. Not that we would actually even play. Sometimes we did. But it was just like, okay, let's see. All right, Joe, what do you have? I've got this little piece for like 1 violin and 3 woodwinds, and then Frank would do something, then I would do something, and I forget who was actually doing most of his arranging then. It was a keyboard player that played with him. So Frank was really wanting to do a lot more arranging for his own ensemble, for the mothers. Don Preston, that's who it is.
Oh, God,
Don was doing a lot of the arrangements for the mothers.
Don played bass with Elvin Jones in Detroit. That's how badass.
Really,
dude. Yeah, back in because Ollie Jackson, Milt's brother, would take a break, and then Don would sit in and play a full. He played with Elvin hundreds of times. Anyway, go ahead. You guys are masters of all trades. So
we were, yeah. So there was quite a few. What should I call them, happenings? Well, I'm an old hippie, so that were happening at that time where we were experimenting. So that particular album that we were originally talking about, was sort of a smattering of like different projects that I was working on at the time. String quartet with a vocal, some pieces that Sally and I wrote together, and then I don't remember what else was on the album, but I do remember that last piece. Which really was just a totally free piece. I had put the sharps of the vibraphone on top of the naturals and played them at the end, where everything sort of went crazy, where Donald was just throwing cymbals against the wall, and Chuck Rainey had pulled out the cord from his amplifier. And you hear this low hum, sort of a feedback kind of sound. And the album I had done before that album, Journey Through Electric Tube, was just like basically, it was a quartet album with Joe and I forget who played bass, Dr. Lynn Christie and Donald McDonald, which was, kind of, it wasn't really a jazz album, like we play a lot of straight-ahead tunes, but there was some original sort of kind of funky, straight-eight kind of tunes, folky songs.
Absolutely, yeah.
And they were expecting that from the next project, which really, I went really way off into, doing like at that time 7/4 and 5/4 rhythms and using a lot of electronics. And unfortunately, that last piece completely did me in. It was like, I think 13 or 14 minutes long, and we loved it. I remember us listening back to it, and I looked at Donald, and Donald says, "You've got to put this on the album." And I knew it was it was going to be probably the death of my of me in terms of continuing with that particular label, because they were looking at me really to play like a straight-ahead jazz quartet like I had done on my very first album with Argo Records. But it was worth it.
No, I mean, I guess the overarching point is that now in today's world, you have outlets to disseminate your art, but in back then, the listening medium was radio and records. And I wanted to know, with Donald and Bernhardt, Maineri, you know, how much? I mean, yeah, okay, you got dropped by the label, okay, but still, the idea of honestly being able to create your own original art without the pressure. I mean, at that time, the cost of living and the minimum wage could totally keep up, and you know, you had an opportunity to see growth. How much? Here's the question: the fact that you were allowed to do what you wanted, the fact that you didn't have bean counters telling you, "Oh, no, you can't put that on the album," the fact that you could pick and choose what you wanted to do, and you didn't have the pressure of surviving, putting food on the table. I mean, really overwhelmed with the cost of living. Did you see yourself growing as a musician because of that ability to do what you wanted to do in the recording studio?
Well, the answer was simple for us at that time, because there was really, at that time, there was so much work for us as session musicians. You know, it allowed a lot of us the freedom to experiment. Not that we wouldn't have it in any case, but at that particular time, I was, you know, sort of making an okay living. I mean, I did have, let's see, I had 4 children, so you know I had to put food on the table. But you know the movement at that time in terms of what was happening musically was so strong, and we were so determined to just play what we felt like was important, you know, musically important. And that the music was really, you know, superseded any monetary gain that we were even thinking about, you know, in terms of, like, oh, we're going to have a hit record, or we need to please the label. Superseded, as I said, like you know, any money that I thought that I could make, because I thought I could just make it up in another way. And I just needed to, I needed to express myself, and I knew that in my heart that would be the last album that I do for that I would do for that label. So and that's why I actually needed to move to Woodstock in a lot of ways, because I knew up there a lot. It was a lot freer in terms musically, and I was interested in playing with folk musicians, rock musicians. You know, Mingus was living up there. So was, I mean, there were a lot of jazz musicians living up. You know, DeJohnette still lives up there. So that community allowed us to really experiment quite a bit.
You know what? I didn't phrase
it.
And
I wish I wish somebody had taped all of the music or a lot of the music that went down at the Joyous Lake, which was a fantastic club where just about everybody played. When they were, you know, if they were playing in Boston, they were coming to New York, they'd stop at the Joyous Lake. Gary Burton, Mingus, Sonny Rollins, it would be Pat Metheny, just didn't matter who. And it would be like folk singers, you know, Dylan was there. There was, first time I heard Sanborn was at that club.
Yeah, well, Sanborn was playing with Paul Butterfield. I mean,
he was playing with Butterfield's blues band.
I didn't phrase the question well, because I mean, you are the Jake Feinberg pocket, really. I mean, I was born in '78, so I mean, this is all before my
'78. Oh,
yeah. You know, I'm a 38-year-old father too, and I'm searching for authenticity for the last 5 years.
I'm a 78-year-old father of 8.
Father of 8, man. That's
yes.
So here's the difference: is that, you know, I can talk to cats. I don't care if it was guys on Elektra, which was essentially a boutique label. Solid State may not be the best example, but the truth is that the business component, the business cats, all they were interested in was making money, and they stayed out of the way of the musician. The musician was able to have freedom. Now, obviously, if you didn't sell the record, they drop you. But the point is, you didn't have people who were incompetent telling people who were competent what to do.
On the whole, that was true. I mean, it's very true.
At that time.
Yeah, I mean, Sonny Sonny just, Sonny Lester, I don't mean to knock him or anything, but he produced a lot of great albums, and he did allow me to make that album. I did have to present my idea to him, and he said, "Go ahead, do it."
Well, I really want to hear. So the idea was, I want to hear.
I mean, and people like Tommy LaPuma, there was some Lundvall. There were guys who just said, "Go ahead, do it, go for it."
Right.
And they really, there was a pop side to their labels, and the pop music really, I won't, without naming names, really supported us. The acts, like mine and others, the jazz acts.
Right, because jazz was never. I mean, you can even say. I mean, that's what I really want to. I want to get.
It's really not.
I want. This is the crux
of it.
It was
a boutique.
But
they were boutique labels.
Liebman and I have been breaking it down for a while, and I want to talk to you seriously about being a jazz cat really through the 70s. It was primarily a Black American art form. It was always a subculture. I mean, how did you originally gravitate to that subculture?
Well, I had been listening to R&B as a kid. I mean, so I grew up in the Bronx, and so when I went, although I grew up listening to big bands in the late 30s, early 40s. That's all I heard in my house was like, 'cause my family was really into like, Goodman, Dorsey, Ellington, on and on.
Woody Herman, yeah.
Yeah, Woody, and then my father would take me to the Broadway shows, and they had all the big bands in the 40s actually still playing, some of the big theaters. So, that was my roots in the 40s. In the 50s, I would go to the Brooklyn Paramount to hear Little Richard and Bo Diddley. It was like a totally different, like the whole doo-wop thing happened, but it was really, there were most of the acts were African-American acts. And that's what I was really in, Earth Angel, I was listening to all of that. That's what we were, in my neighborhood, that's what we were dancing to, that's what we were listening to. So that, those rhythms really, became part of my consciousness. It was something that was not unfamiliar to me. Those kind of backbeats, those bass lines, So, I was playing with Buddy Rich and, playing sort of swing straight ahead. But when the music started changing in the 60s.
No, let's not jump. I don't want to jump through the bebop period. This is really important because the rhythms are so into. I'm producing a documentary on Stan Getz. I'm not sure if you ever had a chance to even play with Stan, but
no, I didn't. But he was a huge fan of Steps. As a matter of fact.
Well, I bet here's the thing: is that Stan? I mean, I didn't even realize it. Was really one of the vocabulary developers of bebop. I mean, I didn't even know that because he gets all the publicity for the bossa stuff. But there's stuff out there with Sonny Stitt and Dizzy and him for musicians only. It's just blowing sessions.
Oh yeah.
But I guess
he and Train, as a matter of fact. Right?
I mean, exactly.
I don't know if you ever saw that video.
That one of course there's one of him and Train, but I'm even just talking about like. To me, that's more that's not a blowing tune. This was like serious up tempo bebop, and this is obviously after he had already woodshedded and cut his teeth with Woody Herman and the Four Brothers. But what was your first gig? I mean, in the 50s, what was your first paid gig?
My first paid gig was 1952. I was on the Paul Whiteman television show with my trio. Oh. I was 14 years old, and I had and my trio was called Two Kings and a Queen. So it was a bass player who was 16 years old and a woman guitarist who was 16 from my neighborhood, and we auditioned for a talent show, for Whiteman's talent show. I know that sounds weird. That was my first paid gig, and we, they had several groups on, several acts. We won, and they kept us on the show, and then we started doing all the other children's shows that were popular in those days, like Children's Hour, Kids and Company, Mickey Mouse Club, whatever. And then I started, playing playing with older musicians as a teenager, weddings, bar mitzvahs, dances, and so that was my, that actually by the time I was 16 or 17, I was making more money than my father.
So it was Stan.
I was supporting the family, basically. I helped. By the time I was 19, I bought a house for the folks and got them out of the ghetto, and we moved up in the suburbs.
Did you? So
I was making pretty good money, as a teenager.
I want to read you this quote.
Very good money, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is from Dick Hyman. He said, in 1948, I got a gig in Harlem at Wells Music Bar. The entertainment consisted of a pianist and an organist. The most influential organist I met was a guy named Charlie Stewart. Charlie and I sometimes played together, he on organ, me on piano. At the same time, I began to pick up organ notions from him. At the same time, a couple of years later, when I went on NBC, I learned how to play a little more organ so I could play game shows. So that sounds similar. It was an R&B. You were an R&B doo-wopper, and that early 50s gig was not in the jazz vein at all. But eventually you found your way into the studio scene, which was already thriving in the 50s. Is that right?
Yes, I mean I had a doo-wop quartet that we were singing
That is
only
awesome.
doo-wop. We were
That
singing.
is awesome.
We were singing. I would transcribe just because I talked to Herbie Hancock about this one time. I said, "What were you listening to in the '50s?" He said, "I was listening to George Shearing and the Four Freshmen."
Wow.
And the High-Lows, and of course all the doo-wop bands. And I was doing the same thing. I was in a group where we sang doo-wop stuff, and we played and sang. Everybody played an instrument. It was like four guys, and we'd sing everything from, like I said, like tunes like Earth Angel. We'd sing that, and then we'd go into like something that the Four Freshmen would sing with more, complex harmonies. So, it was. I don't know if that answers your question, but people say to me, well, when you play the vibes and you play these, harmonies and substitutions and where did that come from? I said, it really came from Shearing and the High-Lows.
That's really important. I'd like you to, because I think most people would look at you askance when you say that.
Four mallets, four guys singing.
Can you, I guess the other thing that I'm fascinated about is just the idea that you look at this linkage in the music between, the Joe Joneses, the Philly Joe Joneses, the Papa Joe, the guys that I remember talking to Bill Crow, the bass player, and he was just talking about how certain drummers used a lot of rebound. Kenny Clark did that because it basically put a lot. I guess what I'm getting at is with Donald McDonald, and I would like you to talk about the drummers who really were not using the bass drum that much, and were using the cymbals a lot more. When I am steeped in this 60s and 70s period of music, 65 to 75, the propensity of drummers playing on those cymbals is incredible. This year alone, I've interviewed Reggie Workman, rest in peace, Joe Sample. Both those cats say jazz drummers today, you could go to see a brilliant 45-minute set. They're not using the cymbals at all.
It's true.
Why? It's so true. I know it's true. I mean,
because of the double bass drum thing. With two pedals, just kind of drives me crazy sometimes.
It's insane. I mean, all I'm saying is how much did this is the point is that I can't hear anything now because of all this. It's all noise. It's all muddy. So the question is, what did it do for your ears to be able to hear, to have a drummer behind you who was just playing time?
Guys would show up just with a snare drum, cymbal, hi-hat, and and a bass drum. That's it, and not play on the bass drum a lot. I mean, I did get a chance to play with Papa Joe. When I was with Buddy Rich, and even before that, when I was playing at the Metropole, I would sub for Harry Shepard. who I believe Harry is still alive, vibraphonist. Play with Cozy Cole and Papa Joe.
That's insane.
I mean, I'm going way back.
No, I love
I
this. I want to go back. I want to go back.
I mean, it was, I just remember the Metropole. I don't know if you've ever been in there. It's probably still the same.
Well, no, I don't know. I don't know if
it's a strip club.
Yeah, well, because that's where Felix Cavallari discovered Dino Danelli for the Rascals. But yeah,
but back in the 40s and 50s, it was really basically a bar where sailors would come in and hang out and try to pick up girls, and the bandstand was up above the bar, right? And there was only enough room for one musician, so you'd be lined up right along the. It was it must have been like a 40-foot bar, stage, and then they had mirrors across from you, and you're about 10 feet up, 8 or 10 feet up above the bar. And the only way you could communicate is by looking at the mirror across from you. And they'd have two bands continually playing. So one band would play, the other one would slowly, like one drummer would replace the other drummer. It was either Papa Joe would replace Cozy Cole. If it was Milt Hinton, he'd replace whoever was, maybe, or this trombone player would replace Tyree Glenn. Charlie Shavers would replace somebody else, and it was on and on. Marty Napoleon was playing piano. I can't remember all the names. I'm getting, I'm starting to forget. But it was great fun playing with those guys. It was more, bebopish swing Dixieland. Depending on who was up there, depending which band was up there, and it was great playing with some of those old cats because the drum kit up there was just. I don't think there was a tom-tom on the stage. Maybe there was, maybe a small tom or something. But
how did it
happen?
It
was just really light, just not, nice, a lot of cymbals, a lot of beautiful, like sort of just open,
I mean, can you talk about how your ears grew? I mean, how it ultimately helped you in your own career? To me, it's just like, people have these rigs now that are just so, and maybe there's a nice sound to them, but I mean, the cats, I mean, they don't use the cymbals at all anymore. I mean, those not only provided colors, but like you said, for you, I mean, are you talking about like literally people would show up with different parts of a trap set and not even put a trap set together? Because that's Chico Freeman said that essentially, you take this.
Yeah, I played with Chico, with Joe Beck. Joe Beck and I played with him several times.
Oh my God, that is insane. Just no drums.
I mean, it was just like a cymbal and high. I mean, even when I played with Buddy, he would there would be times when he would even touch the bass drum. I mean, that sounds like because I played with the quintet or sextet with him, and when I think of Buddy Rich, I think of 4/4 on the on the bass drum all the time. But there would be times when he would just especially the later sets. As a matter of fact, the last set, he hardly ever played the last set. It would always be so many drummers in the audience, either Philly Joe would sit in, or Max Roach, or whoever was in the audience, if it was Belson, or if we were playing opposite Blakey, Art would sit in and play. So I really got a good taste of playing with so many great drummers, when I was young. And, I mean, just think about how the drums were recorded. And also, there weren't microphones on every drum. I don't think there were any microphones on the drums at all. I don't recall. There was a microphone on the piano, and one for, if there's two horn players, they would share one microphone. Right? There was no microphone on the bass. And the bass was not amplified. There was no amplifier.
Right.
There was a whole different concept of, what was acoustic and what, and the bass player, you'd kind of hear the notes, but it was more like you just feel what the bass player was playing.
Well, that's what I'm getting at is feel.
And now when I play with, I have a huge, more than drummers, with acoustic bass players who have these humongous amplifiers, and they're always just like the loudest thing up on stage and out in the audience. And because of that now, engineers, audio engineers that are out there are so used to, when you go, I just came back from Europe. I've been on the road for 6 months, but just came back from Europe, and it was just almost too much by the end. And I'd go out and talk to the engineer in the house, and most of them are used to engineering rock bands or R&B bands or whatever, And I would listen to the bass, and it was the loudest thing on the stage during a sound check. And if you ask the bass player to turn down on stage, they're sort of like, some of them are quite indignant. Hey man, can you just turn down a little bit? And it's like, okay. And then when they do that during the sound check, and a lot of guys would just turn up, when you're playing the gig itself. So between the bass being that loud, whether it's a Fender bass, but especially an acoustic bass, and the drums being, what they are today, everything's mic'd. Every cymbal, every, drum. It's like 5 drums, 6 drums, 7 drums sometimes. There's no air, There's no place to there's no room to play. There's no. So everybody's just kind of like trying to pound their way through.
Well, that's what I'm getting at is
the rhythm section. Try to get above and beyond the rhythm section. If you're a pianist, where do you go? How do you compete with that? Never mind if you're a vibraphonist.
Well, and I look at it very. I love the vibes dearly. It's one of my favorite instruments, and it started to disappear from all musical settings in my mind around the time of the advent of rock, when rock really got its teeth into music. But was it just the old guard? The idea that Buddy took. Why would he take? Explain to younger cast listening all over the world why someone like Buddy Rich would take pride in not playing the bass drum.
Well, in Rich's case, as you know, he's quite a character. So he would. There'd be times when he would just want to hear the bass. How the band sounded without him playing time on the bass drum.
Wow.
He would just sort of lean on the bass player. And we always had really, really good bass players playing with us. And he just let it go, especially with ballads, or medium tempo tunes. And we'd just not play the bass drum. He'd play maybe a hit here or there, something like that. I remember him playing, when we were playing in Chicago, just about 3 or 4 days, he had his foot on the hi-hat. He never played the hi-hat. He didn't play the hi-hat for 3 days. I thought I was going to go crazy. He just set his foot on, I don't know if he had an argument with his wife or not, but he just set his foot on the hi-hat, and he was just playing time on the cymbal. And then once in a while, he hit the bass drum. And just we just played for 3 days. And, of course, all these drummers came in to hear, a Buddy Rich solo, and that's why they would basically show up.
Sure.
Sure. I had to Buddy play one of his 15-minute, amazing solos where you think he was going to have a heart attack any minute. But it was just like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. Just play some time. It was nice. It was great.
It's so invigorating to talk. Did you have you played alongside Sam Most a bunch with Buddy?
Yes. A little later on. First, it was when I first started playing. It was with Willie Dennis, was a trombone player, Selden Powell,
sure,
Harry Sweets Edison, Phil Woods, John Bunch was playing piano, or Dave McKenna also.
Wow.
Earl May.
This is like
Earl May was playing bass.
Earl May, Dizzy's bass player for a minute. Yeah.
Yeah. There was different, several different combinations in the beginning, and then he brought it down to a quintet with Sam playing mostly flute and tenor sax. and then Ralph Eriksson, a Swedish trumpet player who lived in the States for quite a while, joined the band the last, I think, year and a half. Beautiful trumpet player, really, really nice. Really coming out of Brownie, coming out of Clifford.
Right. I mean, this is just so fascinating stuff. I mean, this is just. Do you remember, like the first? I guess what would be your, as a leader now? What do you consider great leadership qualities on the bandstand?
Well, I can speak as a vibraphonist.
Well, but you've been a leader though. You've been a leader on the bandstand.
I know. I've been a leader since I was 14, and I realized as a vibraphonist, first of all, most vibraphonists from the 40s, and then there was only really basically 3 or 4 of them, right? This was Hampton, Red Novo.
Who was the woman that played with Shearing?
That was Marjorie Himes.
Yeah. And
she was really the reason why I wanted to play in the vibraphone, because my mother used to listen to her radio show. I think it was it came out of Chicago, and she used to listen to Marjorie Himes' show. And said to me, I think I was 10 years old, "You're going to play the vibraphone." I love the sound of the vibraphone. And she asked my father, and said, "You have to buy him a vibraphone." And of course, we were really poor. And he said, "What? We can't afford that." And she went to work in a sweatshop for 2 years and bought me a vibraphone. I was like 12 years old when I finally had the instrument. And then dragged me downtown, like 3 trains from the Bronx, all the way down to the Bowery, where there was a vibraphone, a teacher, a guy who taught me to play. Put 4 mallets in my hand, and that was my first lesson was a couple of hip bebop tunes,
Which ones? Do you remember?
Well, it was like a lot of 2/5 things. I mean, we started with something simple, like 2/5s, like a T for 2 that modulated, and then we went to Cherokee. It was like that. And I had pretty much, because my uncles were musicians and my grandfather was a really good jazz guitar player, my step grandfather. So I really kind of knew these tunes. I knew them in my head. My grandfather had given me a fake book, the old fake book back in the 40s, which had all the lyrics and the refrains to all of the songs, never mind the verse, bridge, verse. It was the refrain. And he really actually, now I'm going off a little bit, when he taught me, which I thought was really important, and I pass this on to students when I do a clinic or a workshop, he'd say to me, learn the bridge first, because you only play the bridge once. You play the verse 3 times. So play the bridge 3 times also. Because sometimes you get on a gig and you say, "Yeah, how does the bridge go? Where does it go? Does it go to the key of D or So that was one of the little tricks that he taught me. But anyway, I realized at a young age that for me to work, I have to be a band leader. I just have to go out and find the gigs myself.
Right.
And that, I sort of carried that philosophy with me till this day.
I mean...
And it takes, showing up. You got to show up.
What about the old school? I mean, I'm curious. I think you would fall into this, with Getz, with Stan. I mean, I've talked to Byrack and Billy Hart and so many cats that played with him. And he was the old school improviser in the sense that, yeah, he could play flowing lines and ideas after ideas, but if he did not hear it, because Stan was not academic, if he didn't hear it, then he would not play. And he would allow the rhythm section to come in and either finish an idea or start something new. Can you talk about that idea? I mean, the idea of not just spastically saying, "Oh, well, it's my turn to solo, so now I need," whatever that means, improvise soloing. I think that's another issue we need to tackle. But instead of just going and blowing and showing off your technical chops, actually waiting to hear what, or feeling where it's going.
Right. Well, it was, I think it has to do with environments. When I was performing back in the 50s and early 60s, and I try to explain this to young people. I mean, there wasn't an idea that you played and then there was applause. You played and then the next guy played. People didn't really applaud that much. I mean, they just didn't. It wasn't like now. It's like if you don't get some kind of applause, sometimes I just see musicians sort of like wilt on stage, and they feel the need that they have to play something that's going to really get a rise out of the audience. Whereas back then it was just much more relaxed because there was like 4 or 5 sets a night,
Right,
2 bands.
Right.
I mean, guys would come in at Birdland and they'd sit in the bleachers and have a few drinks. They'd be talking. Train would be playing, or somebody, and it would just be so what? Next, whether it was Horace and opposite Blakey or opposite Buddy Rich, there wasn't this constant like applause. Now you hear people like they stand up and start whooping like we're at a football game.
Right. Well, it's a very formulaic time now. It's like, okay,
Miles would play the head, walk to the bar. Wayne would, and then he'd say to me, buy me a drink. Hey, you sound good, Mike. Buy me a drink.
Sure. Well, no, I mean Marty Ballin.
So I got the bill at the end of the week.
Marty Ballin from the Jefferson Airplane saw.
And then somebody would be playing a solo for 10 minutes. I mean, it was just a much more relaxed. There was always a little competition there, but not like it is today. I think there's this, people just rising out of their seats, cheering like, you accomplished some great feat. You just played like, 6 choruses on a blues.
I think part of it is
it's just like, please
people
stop.
There's an anxiety though, Maineri, is that you don't have the venues to play in. The competition was less, obviously, because everybody had. Listen, you were singing for your supper in the studios, and you can go out and have fun. Nowadays, there's competition from the entire world.
Absolutely.
There's a supply and demand issue. Anyway, we have a game on this program called Name That Tune. I'm going to play this for you right now.
Oh, no.
And I want you to just marinate on this for a minute, and then we'll come back and break it down. Hold on.
I know what that is. Music on the Jake Feinberg Show brought to you by the Stereo Hospital, the Circle Tree Ranch, Abbott Taylor Jewelers, and Craig Pretzinger of Allstate Insurance. And we thank them for their support. Well, first of all, we had an audience applause there at the beginning, which was kind of ironic. And then I know where that was too.
Oh, what do we got? What do we got here, Maineri?
Because that was probably in Rochester at the Red Creek Inn, with the group that called Image. And with Steve Gadd,
Yep.
Warren Bernhardt, Tony Levin, David Spinoza, and myself, and actually the 4 of us, not Spinoza joined the band a little later on. The 4 of us were living. That is Levin, Gadd, Bernhardt, and I were all living in Woodstock at the time.
In the same pad?
Not in the same pad. No, we were living in different homes. Of Steve, managed to get. I had heard Steve. Should I give you? You have some time? I heard Steve on when I was called for a session in New York. I showed up and and it was quite a big band. Studio musicians that you would know. J.J. Johnson. Eddie Burt. We're all looking at each other, and this guy walks in with a hat, young guy, and it was Chuck Mangione. I had no idea who he was. And the artist was the Gap Mangione Trio from Rochester. And we were going to accompany them on this record date. And Gap played piano, and Steve Gadd was the drummer, and Tony Levin was the bass player. And we had, as New York, hard-nosed musicians that had played, with
Right.
just about everybody. Just like, who are these guys, Oh, man, this is going to be a long day, kind of thing. And to make a long story short, I remember when Steve started playing, I said, man, I got to get this guy's phone number. This guy is really great. And I walked up to him, and so we hooked up. And I also got Tony's phone number. They were living in Rochester. They were playing, and they had both, I think, were married at the time. I think Steve had one or two children. And I managed to get Tony to come down, little by little, play on some record dates. And Tony was the first one to move to Woodstock, and he and Steve were best friends. And Steve would come down and do some sessions, and finally he moved to Woodstock with his wife and two girls, his two daughters. And we were just one little happy family, and we'd rehearse in my barn. I had a barn that I converted into a studio, and we had this band called L'Image, which we played for a couple of years. We'd play in New York, we'd play up at Rochester quite a few times. That happened to be recorded at a particular time, I think, by one of his cousins. As a matter of fact, there's a really great drum solo that follows that vibraphone
You're
solo.
absolutely you're spot. I mean, you've been scoping this stuff out. I mean, to me, it's like, I mean, I know Yuma Sultan lived up there. I mean, there were just these organic. It was such an organic time, man. I mean, do you look back on it now?
Oh man, it was incredible. We played at the Joyous Lake. We used to play at the lake quite a bit, and as a matter of fact, we've had a couple of reunions with L'Image over the last 6 or 7 years.
Get out of
Steve
here.
Yeah, with the same quint. Yeah, with Steve and Tony. Played at Birdland twice. We went to Europe. We went to Japan. We did a bunch of gigs. And I hope to do it again because everybody's still around.
Well, no, I mean, I definitely want to. That's absolutely.
And we played that tune. I mean, just like 4 years ago.
What was it about
Love
Steve?
Play.
What was it about Steve's playing? I mean, Steve came. Just talking to him, having quite a bit of an opportunity to break it down with him. I mean, he was clear in the point of saying that he came from the jazz bag into R&B and soul, which he eventually became well known. But what was it about his playing in that trio? That really got you going. I mean, was he a nat? Was he able to hold it down? Was it just that he was playing with all sorts of fills? He made it look effortless. I mean, can you just talk specifically about
all of those things? No, all of the above. You can. There's those times when you just hear somebody, and I do. Because I was always looking for rhythm sections. And I was always looking for, keeping as a band leader, you just got to keeping your eye open for, I shouldn't say young musicians because these guys are younger than me, and even all those years I played with Steps, everyone thought I was as old as everybody else, like Michael and Becker and say Peter or Eddie Gomez, but I was a decade older.
Yeah.
So I had been a band leader, and I'd been around 10 years before most of them were playing professionally. But anyway, I was always keeping my eye out. So when I heard Steve, immediately just, and I wasn't the only one in that room, believe me. I mean, everybody said, "Hey, who's the drummer? Who's that drummer? Man, wow, who's that kid? Wow." It's just like you just can tell. I'm sure it was like it's like the first time I heard Tony Williams was in Chicago. at the Sheraton Hotel. I mean, Herbie Hancock called me and said, "Hey, man, you want to check something out? Come to the Sheraton Hotel and check out the new drummer, Tony Williams." I almost fell off my seat.
We've been jumping around here. I mean, can we do part two?
Sometime, you mean? Not today, right?
No. I mean, I'm gassed right now. I mean, this
Me too.
This was exhausting.
I have a daughter coming home, a 16-year-old coming home like any minute.
Good. All right, I'll let you listen. Two things. Can you connect me with Bernhard and Spinoza?
Sure.
You know, can you do that?
I can do that.
All right. So I just drop you an email. I
have your email here.
Yeah, just drop me an email, and then we'll set up part two. We'll do part two next week, but we got a lot more to get to, man. A lot more.
All right.
You were great. I really appreciate it.
All right, thanks, man. It was fun.
Yeah, cheers, Mike.
All right, Jake.
Later on, bro.
Peace. All right, take care.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Later.
Bye. Just a legendary character. Nice hot first set there with Mike Maineri, legendary vibraphonist, still doing his thing. Still cranking, waiting for his daughter to get home. We're going to rejoin the Jim Parisi Show in progress, and we'll be back tomorrow with Jeff Tamalier on the Jake Feinberg Show.
They're doing a show remotely from home, and I look over. It was right after the show, actually, and I look over, and I see all these police cars and SWAT teams and all that, and it was the Ohio State University attack.